there are two things that are happening when I say schooling against the prison. One is we have to acknowledge the presence of the prison. The prison looms large in the West. America is an incarceration nation.
That's right.
America is obsessed with incarceration.
That's right.
Now, part of that, may I use some of this water?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to violate no ritual I don't know about. Okay. I don't want to upset the ancestors. Y'all said nat, so I'd rather be thirsty. But we have to understand what that means first at the demographic level, because the numbers are stunning. America incarcerates 25% of the world's prison population. Think about what that means for one nation to incarcerate 25% of the world's prison population. And I'm being very conservative, maybe the only time I'll be conservative, very conservative with those numbers. Because when you start talking about exporting prison, Guantanamo, our role in Gaza, the open air prison, when you look at children in cages across the border, the numbers just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But America locks up more of its citizens than anyone else. It's amazing. Remember back in the almost the good old days of George Bush, when we were just regular old-fashioned crazy, right? You know it's bad when you get nostalgic. Old-fashioned racist fascism, right? He even seemed kind of smart now. But they talked about the axis of evil. Iraq, Afghanistan, a little bit of China, a little bit of Russia, Cuba. It's crazy though. We incarcerate more folk than all those nations put together.
That's right.
If you take any of the developed nations, take any two of them, three sometimes, add them all up, we lock up more people. We incarcerate more black men per capita than apartheid South Africa. This is the context we're dealing with. So the idea of being an incarceration nation is where I want to begin, because when I say schooling against the prison, the first thing I want you to understand is what it means for the prison to loom so large. Because it doesn't just mean that we lock up a bunch of folk, although we do that. There's a 28% chance that black men in America will spend some time in prison over their lifespan. 28.5%.
Yeah.
That ain't 28.5% Negroes in North Philly. That ain't from people in Hunting Park where I'm from. It ain't people down the bottom. It ain't people in the old, what they used to call the Tenderloin. It ain't people down the bottom. All black people. 28%. White folk is 4.4%. Now, that number's low compared to us, but the idea that still 4.4% gonna be locked up. Do you know how big a number that is? That's a huge number. When you add juvenile facilities, you go down to youth study center when we was young, and God forbid we start adding the schools that are like prisons. That's a whole other conversation.
That's
Right.
Daniel Boone, O.B. Cato.
Exactly.
And they named O.B. Cato, a great man, a disciplinary school.
That's exactly right. And that's what ends up happening. So you associate these names with discipline and punishment rather than achievement.
That's right. That's right.
It's like Chris Rock was talking about on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Don't nobody want to walk down Martin Luther King Boulevard. Nobody live on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Because you know that's where you get the crack. That's what violence going to be. You might be able to get you a nice 3-piece, but you might catch a 2-piece doing it, right? So, the age of incarceration is about the fact that so many of our citizens are in cages. But there's something more. And this is what I want to get at. Because that's a demographic challenge that maybe could be eliminated quickly if we wanted to. The problem with the incarceration nation is that we not only lock up a bunch of people, but we have accepted as normal
Yes. Normalized it.
that discipline, that justice
That's right.
is punishment.
That's right.
And that punishment is confinement. So that we can't think outside of the prison. It is easier to imagine the end of the world itself than to imagine a world without prisons. So the age of incarceration is one where whenever we think about getting justice, we got to punish somebody. Instead of asking who was harmed and how do we make them whole, we ask who did it and how can we punish them. That's our default position, and it doesn't just play out in terms of interpersonal conflict. It becomes our governmental response to stuff. We close mental institutions. Remember y'all cousins that was up on Barberry? Then they closed Barberry. They wanted to do it under Carter. He ain't last long enough, but they did it under Reagan.
They did.
Barberry was still open in the 80s, 90s, but they were shrinking. You go around the country, shrinking. And those people who were in mental health facilities went where?
To the prison.
They went to the street. You're right.
Yeah.
But it was a journey. They took them to the street because you can't just take people who are mentally ill and put them in prison.
Right.
No, they do something called transcarceration. They take you from the prison, from the mental health institution, then they put you on the street. Then they make it illegal to be on the street.
And then they lock them up.
So in the 80s, suddenly you saw all these rules against loitering and trespassing. And they made anti-homelessness law. No, you don't make it illegal to be homeless. You just make it illegal to do the stuff that homeless people do. Right? So they made these laws about camping outside. It wasn't for white folk. It wasn't for the Swiss Family Robinson. It wasn't for folk in Lower Merion hanging out in the park. No, it was for people who were homeless, who had canteens and thermoses and coolers. People, so you couldn't camp outside. But what they were doing essentially was trying to ensnare more and more people. Public urination, public drunkenness, loitering. You make a bunch of laws that make the net wider and wider and wider and wider and wider, so more folk get caught up. Then they can pick who they want to throw back out.
Right.
Because there's a whole bunch of folk at 36 and Walnut who do public drunkenness. I could go to Manioc and find public drunkenness any Friday and Saturday night. We ain't looking there. So you make the South Shore, oh my God, stand in front of Fat Tuesdays. So they make the net big so they can catch everybody and they just throw out the ones they don't want. Get rid of the whitefish.
That's right.
So we have an obsession with it.
Yeah.
Hold that in your brain for 1 second. I'm going to pivot for a second. We're going to come back to that. Now we got these schools. Schools are a critical mechanism for how we understand the world. Schools have never been neutral.
That's right.
They've never been agnostic.
That's right.
Every part of the building
That's right.
is a project. It's a battleground.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
This is what Amos Wilson was trying to tell you.
Yeah.
This is what John Henry Clark was teaching us. This is what Carter G. Woodson was talking about in the miseducation of the Negro. See, you can't just look at school as reading, writing, arithmetic, even though there's something in that too. But every part of the school shapes who and what we are. I remember Haki Madhubuti told me, he said, you know, when I go in somebody's house, first thing he said, I look at is their art.
That's right.
I look at what's on their wall.
That's right.
And I look at what's on the shelf.
That's right.
Because if ain't nothing African on the shelf, if ain't nothing African on the wall, that means something.
Oh God, yes.
It's a reflection of your mind.
Yeah.
So what happens when I walk into the school?
Yeah.
See, school is the place where you learn what you can't do. School is where Arturo Schoenberg was told that Africans had no history.
That's right.
And John Henry Clark.
That's right.
Think about how many of our great freedom fighters were told in school what they were not. Malcolm was told that the Negro could not be a lawyer in school.
That's right. That's right.
Charles Blockson. These aren't coincidences. School is where Asada Shakur was told that she had the wrong body. That black folks' features weren't beautiful. School is where your children are told they can't be engineers, when little girls are told they can't be mathematicians.
Right.
It's stunning what school tells you you can't do. School has a curriculum that tells you what's normal and what's not. So that settler colonialism becomes natural and normal. When you're reading in literature class about the settlers and the cold nights they had as they came to America to discover the new world, Not leaving out the fact that they displaced other folk, that they invoked treaties, that were created treaties that they would never honor from indigenous folk, that this nation state was built on the unpaid labor of African bodies since 1619. This is what they don't tell you, and so you come out of school thinking the world works this way as opposed to that way. You go to school and literally pledge allegiance to empire every day.
That's right, brother.
This is what school does. But school has another function. School prepares us for this capitalist economy. You come to school and black folk get white teachers. You learn to have a white boss. You learn to go somewhere and stay for 8 hours. Sometimes you gotta wear a uniform now. You get 2 breaks. You get to follow instructions, but you don't get to pick what the thing is, you just have to do it. There's a hierarchy.
That's right.
Just like following management.
That's right.
I follow the teacher follows the principal follows the superintendent. I call the supervisor, you get my manager, I get the regional manager, I get the regional manager.
Right.
That's it.
I'm taught to work for a grade or a test score, not the intrinsic value of knowledge.
That's right.
Similar to the person on the factory line who is not working to create a desk, they're working to make $8 an hour, and the fact that the desk gets made and sold for $200 and I'm completely alienated from my labor shouldn't be my issue because I'm told to work for extrinsic motivation rather than intrinsic motivation. This becomes what school does. It prepares you for a thing. Now, how do I connect those two things? Well, because the capitalist economy is directly connected now to the prison. We talk about for-profit prisons. Let's explode that all prisons are for profit.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
There's some private ones that just simplified the relationship. But the prison has always been for profit.
Yes.
Now, the only moment where you could perhaps argue it wasn't is when only white folk was going to them. Remember, the penitentiary was an experiment, an opportunity. Some good folk, Quakers and folk like that, thought about the idea that we could make a place like Eastern State Penitentiary, and that someone who had done a bad act could go there and reflect on their act in silence, and we give them books and Bibles, and they could have penitence.
That's right. That's where it comes from.
Penitence, penitentiary. And they could figure their life out and go back. And that was cool till Negroes started going to them. Because they didn't want to put Negroes in prisons before. Why would they want to give a Negro time to read and write? That's the last thing they want Negroes to do.
That's true.
Then you get this Emancipation Proclamation, and you have suddenly these so-called free Negroes, and you got these plantations that need work, and you got these railroads that need work, and you got places that need work, but you no longer have enslaved Africans to do the labor of building America. So we got to figure something out. So what they said is this 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery, except for commission of a crime, what do? They just make everything a crime. Slave codes become black codes. So now you can't be a vagrant. You can't be unemployed. How you gonna make it illegal to be unemployed when you ain't giving nobody no job? Cursing in front of a woman.
That's
Of course, white men never.
raising your voice.
Right, raising your voice. Right, reckless eyeballing. Right. This is the real stuff. So then those same Negroes who were free were now put out to labor through the convict leasing system. So now you were no longer in prison, you were leased out on those same plantations sometimes. So the prison in the 20th century became a mechanism for what? For sustaining the American capitalist project. So the same black bodies that were used to build the Negro Project, think about cotton exports in the South. Think about all the institutions built in the North to support the slave economies of the South. Now, the prison becomes the way to reconcile the gap between the enslaved Africans who were free and the labor needs of the North and South. So as we move through the 60s and the 70s, our need increases because we have a social safety net and we need to find a way to pay for all this stuff. You got people who are homeless. Yeah, we could continue to invest in mental institutions, or we could criminalize poverty. There are people who are self-medicating, partly because they're mentally ill.
Right.
Magic coincidence, just to be clear. At the very same time that people were on the street needing drugs and were forced to self-medicate, this thing called crack hit the streets. Total coincidence. And crack was cheap, easy to get, and stronger than ever. So, do we create medical facilities for drug treatment? No. We intensified the Nixon war on drugs under Reagan. We create junk science around it. Crack monsters. Instant addiction. Crack cocaine, way more addictive than powder cocaine. All medical mythology. Now, I'm not asking y'all to test that theory. I'm not saying crack is not instantly addictive, but don't test the spirit, as the Christians would say. But they created a medical mythology that justified incarcerating black folk under this time. So all of our social problems, all of our medical problems didn't get treated through socialized or medicalized responses. We gave criminological responses to it.
Yeah.
We criminalize poverty, homelessness, mental illness. And that's what transcarceration becomes.
Yeah.
So what roles do schools play in this? Well, schools have to, first of all, normalize the idea that people belong in prison. And in the same way that schools are preparing you for the labor dimensions of the capitalist economy, working in factories, now that the prison is looming so large in the capitalist landscape, now schools also have to prepare you for life within the logic of prisons. So that prison life becomes normalized to you as well.
Yeah.
Because those same black bodies that were going into dead-end factory jobs are now going into prisons.
Yes.
So for me, the question is, for my work, is how do we do something different? A woman named Mary O'Reilly, older text, maybe 30, 40 years old. She wrote a book called The Peaceable Classroom. And in The Peaceable Classroom, she talks about this Egyptian postmodern literary theorist, Ilhan Hassan, I believe his name is. And it was during the Vietnam War that he asked the question, how can we teach to stop people from killing each other? How can we teach English to stop people from killing each other? And I wanted to raise a similarly provocative question. How can we do school in ways that stop us from caging each other? Not just to shrink the prison, which is important. We're going to talk about that in a second. But to give ourselves permission to believe that we can have a world without prison.
Yeah.
So for me, that's an abolitionist tradition.
Yeah.
I'm talking prison abolition.
Yeah.
I know prison abolition unsettles folk. Some of y'all are like, I know we need to reform these prisons. I know we get rid of these prisons. I don't know about getting rid of all these prisons. I know niggas need to get prison. Ain't that what Richard Pryor said? He said, I used to hate the prison, so I went there and saw something. I was like, thank God for prison. We'll get there. Trust me, we get there. And so, what is prison abolition? First, I want to be very clear. Abolition is not a metaphor. The reason I say that is because academics sometimes take the language of the people and domesticate it. They take the teeth out of it. So that by the time you doing the thing that we talked about doing on the ground, we ain't doing nothing. I'm going to decolonize my teaching. I'm going to decolonize my classroom. I'm going to decolonize the neighborhood. But the settler's still there.
That's right. There you go.
Decolonization wasn't a metaphor. When we said decolonize, we literally meant change the relations of power and the material relations. You can't decolonize if the colonizer still has all the land.
That's true. Yep.
It can't just be discarded. It can't just be about the knowledge in the curriculum either. It can't just be about changing the books we read, although that's important. But if we read the right books, if we read Fanon right, we should be wanting to do more than write books about Fanon. We should be changing the material conditions that we operate in. We cannot decolonize a space until we take over the space.
Right.
So, when I say abolition, I'm talking, that's why I use the language of abolition, just following a long tradition of folk who have used the language of abolition. Because when I say abolition, I'm talking about the same tradition of folk who said that slavery must end today. Not the gradualists,
Right, right.
not the folk like Lincoln, who are relatively indifferent.
Right.
The folk who are willing to lay their bodies on the line and demand an immediate and unequivocal end to the project of caging and enslaving other human people, other human beings. That's abolition.
That's the tradition, right?
And it is my contention, following a long tradition of folk, that the prison must also be abolished.
Yes, it does.
What does that mean in concrete terms? Just to give you a quick sense. For me, abolition means 5 things. Or there are 5 material strategies for abolition. One is a moratorium on all prison construction. If you build it, they will come.
That's right.
Somebody got to pay.
Somebody got to pay, and somebody got to fill it, right?
That's
Your mama make all this food, somebody eating it. I don't care if you have a taste for chicken or not. That's that new shit, right? You know, Mom, I don't have a taste for that. You got a taste for eating? You either have this or sleep.
Right.
2 options. This chicken or this sleep. So, we need a moratorium. I'll talk more about that, but we have to stop building prison.
Yes.
Because that also forces us to reassess where our economic priorities are. If we're not building prisons, what are we building? Second, we need decarceration.
Yes.
Decarceration means getting people out of the prison, literally emptying or liquidating the prison. There are ways that we can empty the prison right now. For example, getting rid of cash bail. And just pause right there. When I say prison right now, I'm using prison in the sort of grand sense. I mean jails, I mean county jails, I mean all kinds of criminalized responses through human captivity. So when I say CFCF, that's what I'm counting that in the prison. Decarceration is getting folk out. Suspended sentences, community dispute-based resolution, ending cash bail, etc. Retroactive decriminalization. There's a whole bunch of folk who are in prison
That's right.
for marijuana.
That's right.
And marijuana is not even illegal in a lot of states anymore. It's at least decriminalized. Our social desire to lock people up for weed has shrunk. We found new stuff to want to lock people up for, but weed ain't really the thing that much anymore. And yet there are many people who are still battling and fighting weed cases. At the same time, there are entire industries of folk who are going to make billions of dollars on that very same marijuana. That again, they told us was killing us in the 50s. And they smoking that devil's lettuce. It's a gateway drug. I'm not sure what it was a gateway to. For me, just the stinger. I try to give you 12 pieces, everything on it. Anyway. You like that sometimes. Oh man, excarceration, third thing. So decarceration is pulling people out of the prison. Excarceration is stopping people from going in. How can we stop criminalizing everything? It's illegal to gamble in the park over there. Man, we don't usually run up in there stopping folk from it. The police got other things to do, like shoot people. But decriminalizing things or stopping things from being crimes that are largely victimless. I would argue gambling, drug possession, prostitution. I'm going to just drill down on that for 1 second because I know some of y'all will say prostitution is very dangerous. Part of why prostitution is so dangerous, part of why sex work, is so dangerous, is because it's illegal. So it gets driven into an underground. So then you end up with pimps, and you end up people. So part of why it's not unsafe because it's illegal.
That's right.
You get what I'm saying? I'm sorry, it's not illegal because it's unsafe. It's unsafe because it's illegal. Now, I would advocate there are lots of things we can do other than sex work, and there's lots of ways to think about how to end sex work. But the way to making it illegal doesn't stop people from doing it. It just draws people further and further away. It increases human trafficking. It takes it out of the spotlight of the public. It's a very dangerous thing. It's much like prohibition in the 20s.
Right.
You know, it doesn't stop it, right? Same thing with weed. I know people I don't even like buying weed because it's legal now. It's no fun. People in California tell me all the time, it's no fun going there and paying at the register. Part of the fun was going to some dark alley and getting just rolled up in a book bag. So we can take away some of the stigma and danger of it by making it work and creating opportunities for one another. We can talk about that too. Decarceration, excarceration. My brain is moving slow right now.
Need some chicken.
Yes, what is number 4?
Need some chicken.
I know what number 5 is. Well, one, 5 is building the caring community, right? Creating structures for folk out, because none of this works if we don't have structures in place both inside and outside of prison, so that when people do come home, they have networks for mental health, and that we don't create structures so that people don't go in. You know, things that reduce recidivism, etc. I'll come back to number 4 in a minute, but it's really important, I promise. I don't know why my brain's moving like this. Yeah, I guess that's what it is. So this is what abolition looks like. So the question is, what role can schools play in that? I want to give you a couple quick things, and then we can talk, because I want to make sure we have time to talk. One is the imagination itself. We cannot repair the damage of this world if we cannot imagine another world.
That's true.
I began by saying that it's easier to imagine the end of the world itself than to imagine a world without prisons. We literally can't think outside of the prison. We have to decriminalize our imaginations.
That's true.
We have to be able to think about the world in different ways and under different terms. And so what traditions do we draw from that allow us to do that? For me, there are multiple ones. The first place I begin is, and this is in no particular order, but in terms of how I've been thinking about this, one is to begin from the place of saying we don't have to be prisoner to this moment. Part of the abolitionist tradition is to be able to imagine a world outside of slavery, even at a moment where folks said that slavery is necessary for the American economy. It's who we are. It's what our economy is, right? It's what our framework is. America can't function without it. We have to be able to dream of new heavens and new earths. There's a long black religious tradition that attempted to do that. Howard Thurman was attempting to relocate the sacred into the secular realm. When Howard Thurman in The Growing Edge talks about this idea of not scaling down the dream to the level of that which is the immediate experience, that's precisely what he was saying. He was looking at the Christian story of the cross, and he was saying, wait a minute, and Howard Thurman didn't necessarily believe in the crucifixion and the resurrection as a material historical event. He had good sense. No extra charge for that. Maybe he'd read about Horace. Maybe anyway, no other charge. But what he said is that the story of the scandal of the cross couldn't be where you stop as a Christian. He said that the next 3 days were important. That the crucifixion was about death, but it didn't tell the final story of death. It didn't tell the final story of life. That while there's a crucifixion, there's a resurrection. That even that moment couldn't tell the whole story about what was possible. And he said in the secular realm, we as African people in America can never let this moment, we can't be what he called prisoner of the event. Even something as extreme as death on a cross, it can't be the final story of our life.
That's right.
That we have to be able to imagine new possibilities, new worlds, new selves. Now, how do you do that against the backdrop of oppression, material oppression? Well, that's where I think the long tradition of African freedom fighters gives us some value. When you think about the work, and Robin Kelly talks about this in Freedom Dreams, and there's a wonderful new book called World Making After Empire by Adom Getachew, East African sister. And the idea is that when black folk imagine new worlds, we were not attempting to replicate the oppressive conditions of white people.
That's right.
We were attempting to imagine new possibilities. We didn't want to simply reverse the relations of domination.
That's right.
We wanted to imagine a world outside of domination. That's why rummage through history so aggressively? Because we can find pre-colonial moments where there was no prison, where folk weren't cast out and discarded. Doesn't mean it wasn't a world where people did harm. There have always been people who did harm in villages, where people did harm in societies. But how we dealt with people was very different. They weren't disposable. So part of what we have to do is to rummage through history to develop a social imagination that isn't linked to this moment. We're not prisoner to this moment. We're not prisoner to this event. By this event, I'm talking about the Ma'afa. I'm saying we don't have to be prisoner to this crisis or this catastrophe or this great African Holocaust. We don't have to be prisoner to this junction in history. We can imagine other moments where we saw people not as means but as ends.
That's right.
Where the value was in community. Where our collective sense of self, not the Cartesian cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, but the African, I am because we are.
That's right.
Yes.
Becomes the starting point.
That's right.
That means nobody's disposable.
That's right.
Some folk might be trash, but they're not disposable.
That's right.
They're recyclable. I like that guy. See, that's why he raps. And so, when you think about the struggle for nationhood in the 50s and 60s, this is one of the things I write about. When we think about Nkrumah, when we think about even the Egyptian struggles in 52, even when we think about the Sudanese struggle, these are moments not where nationhood was not meant so that we could build new empires. It wasn't meant so that we could develop new borders and kick people out and build walls. It wasn't so that we could close ranks around a narrow idea of citizenship. In many ways, the nation was simply our framework and language for democracy and humanity against the backdrop of this very particular post-World War II world. But our goal was something bigger. We weren't trying to make empires. We were doing something called world making. World making meant, how can we build a new world based on humanistic principles that honored who we were and who we are and what we could be, and not try to replicate what France was doing or what the British Empire had done or what the Ottomans had done. We were trying to imagine a world after empire. So how do we imagine a world after prison? Right? Dr. King's dream, an audacious freedom dream.
Yes.
That wasn't about making Negroes better capitalists, but imagining a world outside the relations of capital. Those relations of capital. How can we imagine new selves, new possibilities, new worlds? That's what school is supposed to be for, to create space for the imagination. But the problem is, in a world where test scores are the priority,
Right.
Yeah.
where teaching to the test becomes the priority, there's no room to even trigger the imagination.
Right.
Because the imagination can't be conjured through tests. It has to be conjured through ideas. It has to be conjured through creativity. It has to be conjured through art. It has to be conjured through song and dance and drumming. But we can't do that if all we're thinking about is the test. So what ends up happening is, in school, you almost have to replicate the conditions of the moment because you're only learning and teaching the conditions of the moment. So to trigger the imagination, we need play
Yes.
and playfulness. But in schools where we're taught that play is just a small reward you get for doing all the worksheets right, in the same way that you get your 1 week off if you work on a job for 10 years, and you get 1 day a year for every year you work. So that relaxation and mental health and play and escape become extravagances rather than part of who and what we need as human beings.
That's true.
So if we're going to reimagine school, we have to reimagine school in ways that center the imagination, because you can't conjure a new freedom dream if you ain't got time or space to dream. And the language of that dream will shift across time and space. Think about Coltrane and Mitten Hall. Was it 67? He ain't know what he was doing. He started playing Naima. The horn couldn't capture what he was doing, so he started singing. Go listen to it. It's a rough recording. Go listen to it. By the time he gets to favorite things, he's squealing through the horn, and finally he just starts singing. Then he started beating his chest because he needed new outlets of creativity that couldn't even be contained within his musical form. So if Coltrane couldn't contain his creativity within the musical form of jazz, what the hell are you going to do with a PSSA test? What are you going to do with some worksheets or some English exam? You need something else. We have to expand the realm of what's possible, but we have to also believe that the imagination is something that we have. Because so often we adultify black boys and girls.
Yeah.
And because we think of the imagination as something that you should be wary of and skeptical of in the first place, it's childlike. No, we all need the imagination.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we don't grant childhood to black boys and girls.
Right.
When the police roll up to Tamir Rice, he's playing with a gun. Now, would I give my kid a toy gun in Philly right now? No. But not because anything is inherently wrong with the, well, maybe with the toy,
Yeah.
but because I understand the dangers attached
Right. Too.
in this particular world. Because I know when they called him in, he was 12, they called him in as 20. And they assumed, because studies show that black boys are seen as older and more guilty than they really are. Right? Philip Atiba Garfield did a wonderful study on this. And so, but they couldn't imagine that he could be playing or using his imagination.
Right.
Because we don't map imagination onto the bodies of black and brown children.
That's right.
We don't give them space for imagination. But that imagination is where we learn to solve problems. It's where, when that toilet paper roll turned into a telescope, and that blanket turned into a cape when you was a kid,
Right.
or you driving down the hood and that's my car.
Right.
This is the imagination.
That's right.
School has to be a place where we nurture the imagination rather than extinguish it. The other thing we have to do is build against the prison. The physical building of the school reinforces not just the practices, but the logic of the prison. Imagine a school in North Philly, or West Philly, or South Philly, or New York, or Cleveland. It's a line down the street to get in because you got to walk through the metal detector. And you got to get searched. And you got to get prodded. And there's a dog sniffing through your legs. And there's a locker search when you get in. There's a surveillance camera when you walk in. We spent more money on surveillance equipment in schools and prisons in the last 10 years. And so you have all of this technology that is geared around surveillance. The school is built like a prison. And then it takes you 20 minutes to get into school. And then once you get in, ain't nobody stopping you from leaving.
That's right.
Think about that. All the work, all the infrastructure, all the technology is designed to make it hard to get in.
That's right.
And you can turn right back around, go to the emergency exit and go home. They don't give a damn.
That's right.
Partly because the money is on attendance. And in some schools, you have to stay a certain number of periods, and then they still ain't stopping you from leaving. Because the money is in your attendance, not in you learning, not in you being physically or emotionally or spiritually present.
That's true.
But when you build an institution for surveillance, it produces. There's a wonderful body of work on post-colonial architecture that forces us, and decolonial architecture, that forces us to imagine what the built environment looks like after we decolonize. Remember, decolonization can't just be a metaphor. We have to rebuild the world so that the school doesn't have a tower in the middle. So that we don't have surveillance everywhere. So that there isn't a sense that I'm being watched and checked and prodded all the time. If we build a school that looks like a prison and feels like a prison, then we are preparing and disciplining our bodies to function in prison. To go out to the yard, I'll be out in the yard for 15 minutes. Why is the learning happening inside and then you go out the yard for 15? Why can't we learn outside? I know it's cold. I'm not saying all the time, but you get my point.
Right.
But we're so conditioned that we literally can't imagine school any other way. Most of us never thought about school being outside. Many of us never thought about school not being in rows. Think about new possibilities. But we can't do that if we don't what? Release the imagination. We literally can't imagine doing school any other way, despite the fact that it ain't worked for us. The amount of money we have spent building prisons, in the last 20 years is astronomical. In order to build against the prison, we must literally stop prison construction and start building schools. But what kind of schools? We could probably have a philosophical debate about public versus private and charter and all that stuff. I don't want to go there now. If you have a question about it, we can talk about it. But at the core, communities must control their schools.
That's right.
I happen to oppose charter schools, but even if you believe in a charter school, what kind of charter school? Oh, is it an Amani charter school? Is it a Sankofa charter school? Or is it a Bill Gates charter school? Who do we want to be? I'm gonna move forward just real quick, just for time's sake. We must end the war on youth. The school against the prison, we must reimagine who our young people are. Right now, we continue to see our young people as sites of containment and blame rather than investment and love. That we continue to make more and more laws that criminalize being young. We have juvenile curfews that literally make it illegal to be young and outside. We legislate against, in some cities, we have legislation against sagging pants. Now, I don't like sagging pants. The older I get, I found myself telling somebody to put their pants up last week. I ain't never felt that old in my life. I don't like the way it looked. I also think it's largely impractical. How you gonna run from the police? Put your pants at your knee. That's my hook to the young boys. I mean, look, man, they about to come on the block. You got to do this before you can even run, man. Yeah, that ain't work good. But I don't want to make it illegal. But again, our response to all of our social dilemmas is to shut down the things that work and criminalize the things that we don't like. We know that after-school programs work. We know that arts programs work. We know that Big Brother, Big Sisters programs work. We know that libraries work. We know that music programs work. We know that sports programs work. And yet we cut them all off. And then when young folk are hanging in front of the bus stop, we mad that they all gathered at the bus stop. So we do what? We make it illegal to hang at the bus stop. We did it in the 80s. We made it illegal to hang at the subway. Much of hip-hop graffiti was was a response to what? These laws that criminalize public loitering. When you see Taki written on a wall, part of what he's doing is scarring public tissue because he was unable to be given access to it. Yeah, we got big-ass radios in the 80s because we need to be heard in places where we're not allowed to stand and be seen. Let's imagine this differently, man. So we have to fight the war on youth by investing where we haven't, by decriminalizing what we haven't, and by reimagining who and what these young people are in this historical junction. Because what it means to be a young person or a youth today ain't what it meant to be a youth 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. The conditions change. Your grandmama might have had, your great-grandmama might have had 4 kids at 16. She wasn't a teen mother. That's a modern social construct.
That's right. That's right.
That has with it a set of understandings and beliefs, but also needs. We gotta understand what these things are. We have to discipline against the prison. What does that mean? It means that in our schools, we have to stop using the logic of criminalization to respond to problems. I'm not, this isn't pie in the sky. This isn't an imaginary world where kids don't do stuff to get on your nerves. The question is, how do we respond to kids that get on our nerves? The logic of criminalization is that when people do harm, you cast them out of the community and you isolate them and you lock them away potentially forever. What I'm suggesting is a framework that says, not that we cast you out, but that we find ways to resolve our conflicts within the community. And that was number 4.
Okay. That's good.
Restraint of the few. Restraint of the few. Why? And these two tie together, so this is actually good. It's like finding a poem you wrote.
That's right.
They ain't even know you wrote it. That's
right.
Sometimes, look at that. So, restraint of the few says that yes, there are some people who are a danger to society. We can't pretend that there's not. Because some of y'all, when I'm like, prison abolition, some of y'all think, yeah, but there's a rapist out there, there's a child molester, there's a mass. I get you. There are a few people who need to be restrained from the broader community. Absolutely.
That's right.
But that doesn't, the problem is, when we hear restraint, the first thing y'all think again is what? Prison. And I'm saying there are other ways to imagine this world other than just through building prisons. And restraining a few don't mean we just make fewer prisons or tiny prisons. It means that we reimagine the entire way we approach harm. So decriminalization, avoiding criminalization means that, one, we don't use the language of crime, we use the language of harm. That's a very important point when we talk about restorative justice, which is what I'm getting to in this classroom. I don't use the language of crime, I use the language of harm. Because crime centers the state. Harm centers the person who was harmed. You get the difference? So
Yes.
if I steal your TV, you probably got a nice one, you work at Temple, they pay good. I've done harm to you. But if I get arrested and tried and convicted, it's me versus the state. I've done it. So essentially, I'm in battle with the state, and you're actually marginal in this, right? As opposed to us working out a way to address the fact that I've done harm to you, and how can I repair the damage that I've done to you? So, similarly in the classroom, part of what we have to do is reimagine what discipline looks like. How do you do that? First, you have to be accountable for who you are. 80% of suspensions and expulsions don't come from a violation of a very clear and concrete policy. Like, you come in, you smack the teacher. You come in, you smoke crack. You set the classroom on fire. These are things we probably will all agree are a violation of the rules. Fair to say? Right. Don't nobody want a school where you set it on fire. That only accounts for 20%. 80% are what we call disciplinary moments. A disciplinary moment is where a teacher or authority figure has to make a subjective interpretation of your behavior. They have to decide whether you're being engaged or not, whether you're being disrespectful or not, whether you're being too loud or not, whether you're being threatening or not. Now these are so the problem is the teacher's not neutral. The teacher comes into the classroom with an identity too. And so the same people who see Trayvon's Arizona iced tea drinking, potato chip carrying body as violent, the same people who see this as a threat with Mike Brown's in Ferguson, the same people who see Renisha McBride knocking on a door needing help in Detroit, those same people who see that as violent are often the people teaching your children. That's right. And so they have to decide whether your child is being too loud or not. But what does it mean when they're operating from their cultural location as opposed to your cultural location? So when black folk are talking over each other, which we would be doing if I wasn't, if y'all was raised right, so y'all not doing it right at this moment. But if we get to the party, or we sitting at the crib talking, we're gonna be talking over each other. And it's not disrespectful. I'll yield to an elder, but if we just get rapping, we just rapping. Go to a barbershop.
That's right.
Right. No, Raheem, I believe it's my turn. Right. Robert's rules of order. Raheem's rules of order here. Nah.
That's right.
But and African-centered psychologists have talked about this in the 80s. Think about Wade Boykin. Think about Gerald Jackson. There's a whole body of literature that talks about the way that African people approach a situation and approach a social context is different than the way other folk do. Doesn't mean all one size fits all. As Professor Sadi would say, it's not essentialist.
That's right.
Or it's certainly not immutable.
That's right. That's right.
But there are certain ways that African folk navigate the social world. Social time perspective. You better not come to my 6 o'clock barbecue at 6 o'clock. You're gonna be setting up chairs. I'm gonna send you to the store for charcoal. I ain't got none yet. But if the teacher interprets our behaviors, our verve, our affective engagement with the world, if they engage those things as disrespectful or a sign that I don't care about school, then yes, I'm going to be seen as significant for them as one of those loud black girls.
Yeah.
I'm going to be seen as violent when I'm not. I'm going to be seen as threatening when I'm not. And so this becomes part of how school operates. So remember, 80% of the kids of the suspensions and expulsions are happening when the teacher has to make a judgment about how respectful I'm being. So the white kid who calls out in class might be seen as, Bill is just so aggressive, he just really wants to get the right answer.
Right.
But oftentimes, when women, even white women, do the same thing, they're seen as disrespectful. When women often speak out as aggressively as men, their behavior is read different.
That's right.
It's the same thing when black women get pulled over by law enforcement. Their behavior is seen as different than their white female counterparts. So it's in this context that school discipline has to happen. So we got to figure out who we are. Who am I? How am I reading your behavior? How am I making an assessment of who and what you are? The second thing is we have to decriminalize the school discipline code. Over the last 30 years, if you look at Overbrook High School's school disciplinary handbook, in 1984, I believe it was like 6 pages. Most in Philadelphia were somewhere between 6 and 10 pages. Most now are like 30, 40, 50 pages. We've widened the net of disciplinarity. So there's more stuff you can get in trouble for. Right? We widened the discipline net, they say. But we did something else, and this happened all throughout society. Remember, school is mirroring society in this way.
Right.
We didn't just widen the net, we also deepened the net. Which means that there's not only are there more stuff you can get in trouble for, but the penalties for what you are deeper. So before, how many of y'all went to Philly public schools? How many of y'all got a pink slip? Right, how many of y'all know what a pink slip is? When you get in trouble, you get a pink slip. I got plenty of pink slip. You get sent to the office, you get written up, you get suspended. We send you home for a day or 2 or 3 or 5, depending on what you did. Now, they have police officers in the school. So that girl in 1st grade, as happened in a school right here in North Philadelphia, who had a temper tantrum, instead of getting a pink slip or have a mama call at 6, got carried out in handcuffs for disorderly conduct.
Horrible.
Now, one, disorderly conduct is a very, again, wide net used by law enforcement to lock up who they want to lock up. Who ain't been disorderly on the street? What does that even mean, right? But they're criminalizing developmentally appropriate behavior. Now, I said developmentally appropriate. That doesn't mean we want you to do it. But if I got mad and rolled around on the floor right now because something happened, that's something different. But if you're 6, that's what you're supposed to do. And then as parents, we correct it. It's not socially acceptable, but it's developmentally appropriate. Except for when we do it. Then you get locked up for it. What used to be a fist fight in school, again, I'm not encouraging fist fights, but if the fist fight gets criminalized, that's a different game.
Yeah.
So we've widened the net and we've deepened the net. So part of how our schools are literally feeding grounds now for the prison. Because more and more people are getting locked up and we've widened the net and we're suspending people. Why is suspension important? Because suspension is one of the greatest predictors of incarceration. Suspension, and you know who gets overrepresented in suspensions? Black folk.
Blacks.
Black folk make up 60% of school suspensions. Still make up 13% of the population. 60% of school suspensions. You know who else? We're also overrepresented in special education. And special education is overrepresented in suspension. So we say, well, something's wrong with him. We can't manage him. So instead of dealing with him in culturally and developmentally appropriate ways, we just say he's broken. We give him a label. But then even though he got that label, we still suspend him for something that we say he can't control because something wrong with him. And I'm using language that, to be very clear, because I'm not ableist, I'm not saying something wrong with all of us. I'm simply saying that's the language they use to stigmatize particular populations of folk. So school becomes this place that mentally prepares us for prison, aesthetically prepares us for prison, and then directly sends us to prison. So what I'm trying to do in my work, as I close this up so we can take questions, is help us dream beyond that. What kind of text can we teach that will help people imagine an abolitionist future? What kind of books can we read? How can we read the old books different? Because I think there's a way to read the book of Revelation different. You think of John on the island of Patmos is captive. As our dear brother Aubrey Hendricks writes about in the what do you call it, the Politics of Jesus, thinking about the book of Luke as a call to free the captive. What'd that mean? What does it mean for us to read Malcolm X and the autobiography in ways that challenge the prison as opposed to romanticizing it? Because sometimes we think Malcolm went to prison and got right. No, Malcolm got prison right despite prison, not because of prison.
Right.
Malcolm got right because his sister loved him. Because Elijah Muhammad loved him. Because Ella and Filbert loved him. Malcolm taught himself. He was trying to get into Suffolk. He was trying to get into these other prisons to get better education. But at the core, Malcolm didn't succeed because of prison. So let's not romanticize prison. Let's read that text in a different way. When we read European theory like Gramsci. Let's not forget that's the prison notebooks. That theory was written against the backdrop of prison. Let's think about Letter from a Birmingham Jail as a carceral text. What did the prison allow for to happen? Let's think about him as a political prisoner. Well, let's revisit Mumia, live from death row. Let's think about jailhouse lawyers. Let's reread Cervantes. Let's listen to hip hop music differently. What does it mean to listen to One Love as a prison text? In schools, one of the things that keeps us so ensnared in trouble is that our children have parents who are incarcerated. And one of the things that keep you incarcerated is being disconnected from your friends and family. That's why they send you so far away. Why aren't we writing letters? You try to teach letter writing in school. Why not teach letter writing to your family and friends in prison? You could learn how to write a letter to a prisoner, not to an imaginary person. We had pen pals back. Remember you write to somebody in Iowa?
That's
I like ice cream too.
That's right.
You write 3 or 4 letters over the course of the year to somebody you don't know.
Yep.
What if we were writing to incarcerated citizens?
That's a great idea.
Let's reimagine what we do in school in the rhythm of everyday practice that would allow us new possibilities for what school can be. Public schools aren't going to save us. Private schools aren't going to save us. Semi-private schools aren't going to save us. We are going to save us.
Yeah.
Our schools have to be an extension of who and what we are. Our values, our belief in liberation, our commitment to creating that world that is not yet. That will happen in school if they're our schools. And they become our schools when we infuse them with our principles, our philosophy, our history, our heroes, our vision. All right?